We want, before we can proceed with the opening ceremony, we want as well to recognize the different government organizations that are in the room, the different CEOs, DGs of government institutions from different countries. Please, a warm welcome into Kigali today. Dear PS, Acting DG of RURA, and distinguished delegates, welcome again to AfPIF 2022 in Kigali. Today's session it's an opening session, and as I had mentioned earlier, in the room we have a representative from AFIX, Kyle Spencer. We have a representative from the PC, the AfPIF PC, and we have Mrs. Grace, who will be speaking on behalf of the local host, Richter, and the acting DG of RURA and the Minister of ICT and Innovation. So without further ado, let's welcome Kyle Spencer, AFIX co-coordinator, for the remarks. A round of applause for him. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gilon. Hi, everyone. As Gilon mentioned, my name is Kyle Spencer, and on behalf of the African IXP Association, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2022 Africa Peering and Interconnection Forum. This is an annual event that brings together infrastructure providers, network service providers, content providers, policymakers, and other stakeholders in an effort to develop the African internet. This is our first in-person event since AfPIF 2019 in Mauritius, and it's been great to reconnect with friends and colleagues. Over the years, and even last night, I've heard numerous people express that AfPIF has led to more enduring friendships and business relationships than any other industry conference or community. And that's a sentiment that I share. And so it's really nice to be back. On that note, I'd like to briefly thank the various people who make this event happen, starting with the Internet Society for leading AfPIF's organizational efforts for so many years and supporting our regional community's efforts to develop our own capacity. I'd also like to, of course, thank our sponsors, both old and new. I think it goes without saying that we simply would not be here without your support. Of course, we also need to thank our local host, the Rwanda Internet Community and Technology Alliance, RICTA. Thank you, Grace, for enabling us to host this event in Kigali, and for being the African IXP Association's secretariat over the years. That was very, very helpful. We're also extremely grateful to the Rwandan Ministry of ICT and Innovation for their exceptional support for this event. I understand that the minister personally involved herself in efforts to facilitate this event, and we are honored to have both of you here as the DG and permanent secretary, so thank you. I would also like to recognize the program committee for AfPIF for working tirelessly to put together an incredible lineup of content, not only today and in events at the past, but also throughout the pandemic when we had to transition to our virtual peering series events. Michelle will talk more about that in a minute. The African IXP Association was founded in 2012, and since then we have experienced significant growth, not only as an industry, but as an organization. Over the years, we've been working to formalize ourselves so that our community can take more ownership of ISOC's various regional activities related to peering and interconnection. And we are now proud to announce that we have chosen to register the African IXP Association in Rwanda. So, as a key gateway between East and Central Africa, we believe Rwanda will be an ideal home for the African IXP Association and an ideal venue for this week's discussions about the challenges and opportunities in our region. I look forward to interacting with all of you today and tomorrow and going forward. And with that, I'll hand over to Grace.
Yes, thank you very much, Kyle. Next up, I think the program committee will be speaking. So, so the program committee is in charge of the program of the whole day. So Michelle will be speaking on behalf of the PC of the program committee. A round of applause for Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to give a warm welcome to the Minister and other distinguished guests that we have here today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and interact with the community here. I'll be speaking a little bit about our program committee, which is the group of people who put together these events, ensuring that we have the content that is relevant for the community and keeping the community engaged throughout the year. As you know, for 2020, we weren't able to have an actual physical event. However, the program committee was able to pivot and actually put together virtual content. Who is in the program committee? This is comprised of members of the community, everyday people who attend these events, who come together monthly to have meetings, discuss what kind of topics would be relevant at the time for the participants of this community, and are able to put this together in this event. So as we've continued to do this, we are happy to all be here, and we thank everyone for all the work that they've done in order to put this committee in order to put in the agenda for a full 3 days or 4 days of meetings and have everyone actually participate and ask questions. So we thank the committee, the organizers, the hosts, and every single one who's participating, whether here physically or online. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So this event will not be possible without a local host. So the Rwanda Internet Community and Technology Alliance, represented by Grace, is the local host of AfPIF, and Grace will be giving her remarks. Welcome, Grace.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Mwaramutse. Mwaramutse neza. Okay. I would like to take this opportunity to first thank the PS for your availability. I know how tight it is to avail and to be here. So I take the opportunity as well to thank the DG of RURA, Mr. Engineer Deo Muvunyi. Thank you for being with us here. Again, I will not forget the Association of African IXPs in Rwanda, so AFIX team. So thank you for being with us here, and as well the Internet Society. So, and all the delegates present here and those following us online, thank you for being with us today. So ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome all the delegates to the country of the 1,000 hills and smiles, and to the African Peering and Interconnection Forum edition 2022. We are happy that this year we can meet in person after 2 years of postponement due to COVID-19 global pandemic. So my friend have said it, the last edition of AfPIF back in 2019 was in Mauritius. So we are happy today that we can convene in our beautiful country. So the Internet Society started AfPIF 11 years ago to provide a venue for discussion on African internet infrastructure challenges. This annual event brings together key stakeholders, including internet service and content providers, IXP operators, government network managers, regulators, and policymakers to share their experience and to advance peering and interconnection arrangements. The traffic exchange inside Africa has expanded enormously as a result of the work by AfPIF over the last years. One of the AfPIF vision that I came to learn during the discussion yesterday is to increase the accessibility of the global networks through peering and to keep 50% of traffic locally. For us to achieve such ambitious vision, there is a need of participation from across the internet ecosystem stakeholders. However, there are still challenges to achieve sustainable, efficient, and cost-effective networking on the continent. And many of these challenges specifically relate to the lack of network interconnection between many countries in Africa, especially landlocked countries. The topic we are currently discussing are critical to creating an environment that supports the ongoing development of the internet and to address the above challenges. This forum has brought together more than 300 participants, 270 on site and 60 virtually from different countries in different continents. We are grateful for our 32 sponsors that you can see here for supporting us this year. Without them, this event would not have been possible. Special thanks goes to the event organizers, which is Internet Society, the African Association of Internet Exchange Point in Africa, AfPIF, and my colleague at RICTA, not forgetting the Ministry of ICT and Innovation that has immensely supported us to make this conference a success. We are truly thankful to all of those who have made this such a great event. The team working on the AfPIF, behind the scene, the speakers, event managers, and participants that are with us. We truly hope that this year's event is of value to you. It is our hope that over the remaining 2 days, we can use this meeting as an opportunity to also discuss the policies across border interconnection and regional content. Local content is essential to local industry and job, and ultimately boost the resilience of the economy. So I encourage everyone to network, to make friends, and to tour around Kigali and experience the beauty of this city. So feel at home. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you for your remarks. Graciously, RICTA and some sponsors are inviting us tonight for a gala dinner that will be communicated later on. We, operators of network, have very important partners and very important government support. And in the room today, we have Engineer Deo Muvunyi, the acting DG of RURA, and regulators are playing a very big role. So Engineer Deo Muvunyi, welcome for your remarks. A round of applause for the...
Thank you so much, Gile. Dear guests of honor, and also the PS, the Minister of ICT and Innovation of Rwanda, CEOs and DGs in the house, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Allow me to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to African Internet Exchange Point Association, AfPIF, and Internet Society, ISOC, for the tireless efforts in organizing this important conference. Let me also thank RICTA and the organizing committee for hosting this event in Rwanda. Distinguished delegates, Rwanda, as a landlocked country, was obliged to use expensive satellite links for internet services, which limited the penetration of internet services due to high costs. As mitigation measures to this challenge, the government of Rwanda hugely invested in ICT sector, and we are now connected through multiple entrances to the submarine cables in Kenya and Tanzania. The internet usage increased, which has consequently increased both the national and international traffic. In Rwanda, the international bandwidth capacity also tripled from Q1, for instance, of 2020 to Q1 of 2022, from 63 Gbps to 156 Gbps. For cost reduction and traffic management efficiency, the establishment of internet exchange points at the national and regional levels have become mandatory to keep home traffic at home and regional traffic within the region. Internet exchange points played a key role in the development of an advanced internet ecosystem across Africa, not only in the international capacity cost cutting, but also on quality of service improvement. The law governing ICT in Rwanda gives RURA the mandate to establish an effective framework for proper management and functioning of internet exchange points in the country. It is in this context that in February 2014, RURA and RICTA entered in an agreement that gives RICTA the mandate to manage, operate, and develop the Rwanda Internet Exchange Point, RINEX. Distinguished delegates, Rwanda Internet Exchange Point, RINEX, is an interconnection point of internet service providers, ISPs, data centers, and content service providers in Rwanda. So far, 14 service providers, data centers, and content service providers are connected to RINEX. RICTA and RURA have undertaken a program aiming at modernizing national internet exchange infrastructure, and the focus is 1, to facilitate the access to internet exchange points. 2 is to enable domestic bandwidth utilization. 3 is to encourage development of local content and web hosting. And 4 is to attract international content providers to locate their servers in Rwanda and promote internet broadband access. We have also noted a positive impact of the introduction of a Google Global Cache, GGC, and Akamai cluster in Rwanda in the past years, which made popular international content available locally and has significantly increased the traffic, which we believe was largely driven by users downloading more video content due to the improved user experience. The RINEX's peak traffic doubled within the span of 2 years, from 2020 to 2022. In addition, the RINEX is increasingly becoming a regional hub for traffic exchange between neighboring countries. Ladies and gentlemen, in line with our partnership, RICTA has developed a 5-year strategic plan with emphasis on awareness and robustness of the RINEX infrastructure. And we pledge to keep working together for smooth implementation of this strategic plan. Distinguished delegates and ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, I would like to highlight that data centers and content delivery networks are the key challenges that need to be addressed to drive wider and deeper internet usage, especially by attracting investors and developers of data centers. I take this opportunity to thank you all, the delegates and partners, for the great work being done in building the internet exchange point in Africa. And I would also like to reiterate RURA's commitment to keep on working with RICTA and other national, regional, and continental initiatives aiming at strengthening the resilient digital infrastructure, peering and interconnection in particular. I once again thank you, the organizers of this very important event, and thank you for your attention. God bless you.
Thank you very much, DG RURA. All what we do as network operators will not be having an impact without policymakers. So today we have in the room the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of ICT and Innovation, Yves Iradukunda. Please welcome him with a round of applause.
Good morning. The Director General for RURA, dear CEOs, representatives from different governments here in the conference, all the different partners and the sponsors for this AfPIF conference. Good morning once again, and a warm welcome to Rwanda for this conference. It is my ultimate pleasure to be here with you today. And as we've just heard from Grace and the DG, this is a very important conversation that we are having. When we think about the different needs of infrastructure on our continent, it takes partners like yourselves to really come together and discuss what are we doing collectively to make services accessible, to make services relevant to the communities that we are serving, particularly when it comes to the infrastructure that is required to make internet a possibility. So for the Ministry of ICT Innovation, and I'll convey the message from Honorable Minister Paula Ingabire, who could not join us in person, but has been very supportive of this conference, but also many of the partners in the room that we work with for the context of Rwanda and other regional efforts that we are involved in to make these infrastructure efforts possible in terms of what can we do to drive access and connectivity for the population. Every time we talk about infrastructure and the players that are in the room, we know already that it's not just infrastructure alone. I think the DG ended on a call to action in terms of the data centers that are required to process the different services, but also the content that is required from different partners. For us, when we look at how our population, particularly in Rwanda, is using technology, we think holistically about, yes, the infrastructure that you have, but also all the way to the smartphones or the smart devices that people are using. We also have to think about the skills. Skills, I'll look at it in different categories where it's engineers that are operating these systems. It's the software engineers that are developing the different services. It's the network engineers that are working with different companies. And also others that are developing advanced systems that can be used in different sectors in industries. But more importantly, it's looking at the general population and ask ourselves, what are the real use cases where they can be able to leverage the infrastructure that we're putting in place to benefit from the connectivity that is being more and more availed and more affordable. So we always, want to address the skills and digital literacy in general, because without that, our population will be not empowered and enabled to take full advantage of the technology and the services that we provide. So that's why when we have this conversation on infrastructure, it's really also thinking about all the different initiatives and efforts that we ought to be involved with to make sure that as this infrastructure at the national and regional level is being put in place, we're also enabling our communities to actually leverage and benefit from it. In doing so, we obviously create a pathway where the access and utilization of broadband can continue to make a significant impact. We are seeing this in all sectors of our economy, whether it's education, healthcare, agriculture, and many others, and applications around environment conservation and climate change mitigation. The technology plays a significant part. And so we need to create possibilities to allow these end users to really be ready as we're investing heavily in this infrastructure how can they be ready to benefit. So as you have heard the remarks from DG, Rwanda continues to make significant investments in addition to what has been going on over the last 2 decades, deploying high-speed connectivity and digital infrastructures, and as I mentioned, focusing on the citizen that is going to benefit and use these services. And so we want to continue to work on adoption. And particularly in Rwanda, we are also revising our broadband policy because we, again, want to, as a Ministry of ICT Innovation, we want to make sure that we create more opportunities for players within the market and removing any limitations that would hinder the kind of progress that we've been talking about and adoption that we've been talking about in terms of broadband penetration, increasing the demand, but also the supply of broadband connectivity. And as I mentioned, tackling the issues of smart devices that the population need, also the skills that they need to leverage. So in the regional and global context, we realized that some of our limitations are around the infrastructure gaps. And so the conference that we're having today and the next couple of days, I hope bring about different ideas, different innovative approaches to how we can mitigate these gaps within the region. As Grace mentioned, part of the discussions is looking at the policy landscape to understand how can governments better support the different regional projects that are going on. So I hope we'll be able to draw significant insights from these discussions and that we can be able, both on the government side, private sector, and other partners that are part of the conference to walk away with meaningful next steps of how we can unlock possibility for investments and make progress going forward. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to end with, again, an invitation for even more partnership. The country that has set out to provide 100% services to the citizen digitally, 100% by 2024. We are investing heavily in that digitization process. And so as you had in Rwanda, and Grace invited you to enjoy the city of Kigali, we also ready to engage in discussion on investment opportunities, partnership opportunities. I see many of my colleagues here in the room within the ICT sector. We ready to have conversations on how can we continue to further invest and unlock opportunities for you, particularly in private sector, to enable our ability to make progress and make an impact. So at this point, I wanted to once again thank the organizers of the conference and thank Grace and Richter team for all the tireless work that you have been doing to prepare the conference, but also AfPIF for having initiated this conference. Despite the delays in the last 2 years, I think this is timely. I believe there was a silver lining to the COVID-19 where we have seen more and more appetite in terms of adoption of technology. So I thank you for having really kept the promise and also reiterate our commitment as the government and the Ministry of ICT Innovation, and again conveying the message from Minister who could not join us, that we'll continue to partner, and I'm glad you're registering in Rwanda in any ways that we can. We will continue to partner with you to make sure that this conference paves the way for even more partnerships and opportunities. I thank you very much.
As the whole community as well, we want to say thank you, extend our gratitude to the ministry who has been relentlessly supporting this whole event. As we are heading into the second section of this session, I would like to welcome Fearghas that will take us through the keynote session. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Gila. Thank you, Gila. Is this working? It's on. I do turn the switch on. Thank you, Gila. Thank you, everybody. So, welcome to the first bit of content for today. I hope you had a good breakfast. You enjoyed the opening session. You had a wonderful evening last night and your head is perfectly clear. Tomorrow morning, this may be harder to achieve, at least in terms of having a clear head. We've got two talks today and before lunch. We've got Patrick Christensen from TeleGeography giving us one of his fabulous updates on the state of the actual network, and then followed by Andrew Owens from Teraco talking about business development and the network in South Africa. So, as per ever, thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to everybody who helps put it on. And we will do questions at the mic after. Over to you, Patrick. Yes, well, you are first on. We will also be talking later about joining the PC because people have been asking. So if you want to know about it, come and talk to the chairs at the front and we can help you. Patrick.
I'll do that. It makes me fun. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm Patrick Christian from TeleGeography, you just heard. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me here to speak for the keynote. And let's get started. What we're going to do is we'll be talking about the big picture of what's happening in Africa, looking at African network trends. One thing to keep in mind for all this data comes directly from a couple of our reports. And one report just came out, our IP backbone report. So all this is very fresh data that has not been released yet. So it's just special for AfPIF. I love AfPIF. Okay, let's get started. Okay, what we'll cover today, we'll start with the global bandwidth trends, but we'll start at a global level. How is international bandwidth growing? What's driving demand? And we'll be looking a bit at subcables, where they're landing, and how fast prices are dropping. Then we'll focus in on Africa, looking at the inter-regional and inter-African route growth, looking at the new subcables, content, sorry, Ben, consortium cables that are coming soon, and looking at price erosion again, but we'll be looking at the African routes and not the European routes, or some of it will be to Europe, but not intra-European. And then finally, what I usually do is I go over at the supply side, talk about supply side, but today at the end, I'll talk a little bit about the demand side. So I'll be looking at end user demand growth in Africa and where we're seeing growth and looking ahead for future growth in mobile and fixed broadband. Okay, first, big picture. Growth, now this is international bandwidth, so it includes both private bandwidth and IP, so internet and then private networks all together. And globally, 44% growth. It's the CAGR 2017-2021. And Africa is out in the lead and continues to be growing faster than any other region. Good job, guys. Good job. You did it. Beating out Asia. Sorry, Asia. Okay. And actually, this says forecasted bandwidth growth, but this is actually what we're looking at here is IP bandwidth growth. Sorry, just got this slide and popped it in, but I wanted to show this. It should be 49% growth. Actually, I'm sorry. This is an okay slide. This is looking in the future, and what we're looking at is up to 2028 and 2021, 2028. And we're looking at even more growth, so up around 50%. And then here's the international internet bandwidth growth. Now remember, this is a subset of total international bandwidth, and it's growing very heartily at 44% as well. Where globally you see the average is around 26%, so mid-20s. So it's growing fast everywhere. And one thing we'll be looking at is subcables. So looking at the forecast for subcable investment, 2022 through 2024, we're going to see a lot of new cables. that have been announced and are going to be landing. So let's start with that. And I know with TeleGeography, we're going to be geeking out on maps and numbers, so let the maps begin. In this map, it shows recently activated cable systems. So this is just 2020 through 2022. And the blue dots show landings. So the bigger the dots, the more the landings in that location. Already it looks pretty active, but then if we add to it the planned and recent cables, there are a lot more bigger dots that appear. Specifically, if you look, we see a lot of activity, Middle East, okay, and Northeast Africa, and then down India as well, and in Southeast Asia, and a bit in Southern Europe. And then a little bit you see, yeah, in South America and West Africa, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So what's driving all these cables? Well, you probably guessed it, content, and a lot of content provider things going on, infrastructure. In this slide, what we see is this is looking at a subset of all content, of course, but we're looking at cloud data centers or cloud regions that are being deployed. And these are planned, so not in service yet, but over the next 2 or 3 years. And once again, the circle size indicates the number of data centers that will be launched. So you see a lot is going on in Southern Europe and Middle East. Now let's talk a little about pricing before we go focus in on Africa. We're looking at, this is 10 gig wave pricing. And we're looking at the big picture, all the different routes to see where Africa is. Okay, good. Now, if we look at Joburg London route, it has one of the highest price erosion rates. And what we do when we're looking ahead of what's going to happen in Africa, very often we look to similar markets, similar regions. And the one that I find, and I know Brett finds this too, very similar or good to compare with is Latin America. And if you compare where Johannesburg, London is now to Miami, Sao Paulo, 2-3 years ago, that's where Sao Paulo, Miami was, okay? So South America very often, or Latin America, we see it drops, or we see the trends about 2 to 3 years before we see it in Africa. So it's a good indicator. Now, the only routes that are still more expensive than Johannesburg, London, at least in here, are Oceania routes to Australia. And now in this slide, what we're seeing is looking at a baseline, London, New York as one, and then the pricing of all the other routes. And this is very similar to what we just said. If we look up the 2 routes that cost-wise are about the same are LA, Sydney, and Johannesburg, London. So still expensive, but coming down. Okay, this is one of the maps that maybe you're waiting for. This one just came out. If we talk about international connectivity in Africa, we see that still about 80% of all international connectivity in Africa is to Europe. And as you can see by the thick lines all going up, there are some routes that are showing up intra-African, but when we look at this picture starting off at 100 gig higher, these are the major routes, still to Europe. But if you look a little bit closer, it hasn't stayed steady at 80% for the last 5 years. What's been happening is all the North African countries have been adding a lot more connectivity, international connectivity to Europe. So they've gone from around 80 or 90% connectivity to almost 100% to Europe. Now remember, we're just talking about international connectivity, so any cross-border connectivity. So the North is connecting more to Europe, but if we look to sub-Saharan Africa, we see a completely different pattern. And it's dropped from close to 80 before to now around 60%. So that's a pretty big change in the last few years. And what this indicates is there's more connectivity within Africa. So that's a good thing. Okay, and here's the other map that I just make for AfPIF. Well, then I show other people, but you guys get to see the first one. Here we're looking at intra-African routes. So we've stripped out anything that goes to Europe or elsewhere and are just looking at African country to African country routes. And this in 2016, so quite a while ago, 5-6 years. We see a lot of activity on the east side, of course, a little bit less on the west, but some around Nigeria. But this is where east side was ahead. But now if we look 2022, at the same scale, we see the a lot more growth, a lot fatter lines. And it looks like it on this map that these are terrestrial. This isn't terrestrial. This is just looking, for example, from South Africa to Kenya. Most of that capacity is still submarine, okay? But if you look, for example, Kenya to Uganda, that of course is going to be terrestrial, okay? So there's a mix. So usually the biggest routes are still sub and a little bit terrestrial. But we're seeing the terrestrial starting to fill out now. And sub-cable wise, the changing of capacity, and we'll see a big influx of new capacity, international, with the submarine cables that are landing. Probably the two most important now, it's a long list, but really it's just Equiano and True Africa that are going to have a big effect on Africa as a whole, and specifically what we're talking about today is Sub-Saharan Africa. There are a lot of other cables like Africa 1, Raman, Medusa, Simiwi 6, but those kind of are pass-bys and maybe hit Kenya, always Djibouti, and have to go by Egypt, but doesn't hit the rest of Africa. So they'll have an impact in that area, but it's more focused on Middle East than it is on Africa. Okay, and this is a close-up just on Africa of the map I showed you before. So you can get a better idea of where the landings are. The highest number of planned landings are in the east, northeast, more concentrated in just 2 or 3 areas. And then in the west, it's actually a similar number of landings as in the east, but they're spread out among numerous countries. And then of course, South Africa is going to get 5 new landings. And if we look at landings by country, yes, Djibouti is way out ahead of everybody, but Djibouti is more of a, all right, Djibouti, is more of a transit hub than actual, right. You're not going for the local population. Although this may be changing with the routes going into Ethiopia and Somalia from Djibouti. So there will be some change there. But we see that group, Djibouti's kind of in a class by itself. And then if we look at the major hubs, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, all with 8 or more. And then we see the growing hub countries of Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Senegal, etc. So looking at a map, where all these landings are, it makes sense. This is where the most connectivity is. These are the areas that we would call hub markets. Capacity lands there first, and then we see it starts to move in. Not as easy as that, of course. You have to build these networks. So it's been many, many years that it's just started pushing in, but now we're seeing a lot of activity and things are great, getting better. Okay, and then let's pop over to pricing a little bit again, but this time we'll just focus on Africa, where you see, of course, at the lower prices are usually coastal routes, okay, or European or coastal, like for example Johannesburg, London. That's the main route, and Lagos, London. But as you go inland, of course, the pricing increases. So you see that the most expensive routes are like Kampala, Mombasa, Kampala. Just basically as you go in, you're hitting backhaul, you're adding to the costs, you see it going up. But recently, just in the last couple of years, it's always been up the east side has always been the cheaper route. And we're looking at 10 gig waves here. But it's just in the last 2 or 3 years, we see on the east side, prices are dropping. So I'm sorry, on the west side, prices are dropping. So we're seeing that as the main route, because now now prices are dropping in Nigeria, but prices are still remaining high in like going through by Egypt and Djibouti. Sorry, guy. Okay. And then that we were looking at the wave prices, and transit prices follow the transport prices. And here we're looking at, once again, the red dots are the decline, price declines. And then the blue is the weighted median. And all of the pricing data we collect from many of you out there. We give the weighted median because, you know, there's a range of prices that we get. So we usually try to do a weighted median, which is kind of the lower, but we realize some people, when you look at that, they'll say, I know I get less, I get cheaper than that. But usually it's a content provider who, of course, they're going to get cheaper than that. They're buying at a much greater volume and have different needs than a 1 year contract with an ISP. So if we look at this as well, we see the price decline in all the main hubs like Joburg, Nairobi, Lagos. It's still falling pretty fast, but not as fast as some other regions. And, you know, as it matures, price is already low, so it's falling not as fast. But then we see like Accra is going crazy, prices are dropping very fast. But then you see like in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, it's kind of not dropping as fast as the others. And you can tell me why, but after. Okay, still keeping with prices. When we talk about connectivity or IPT, usually this follow the pipe and port model, where you have the pipe transport up to Europe, and then you get IPT in Europe. Now we're finally seeing that IPT pricing locally is dropping to levels lower than the pipe and port. Okay, so we see in certain markets like in I'm sorry, yeah, that's right. In Lagos and Abidjan, we're seeing more of a focus on it price-wise. I'm not saying performance-wise. It's starting to equal out, whether you get it locally or do the pipe and port model. And when we're talking about pipe and port and talking about content, we have to start looking at kind of the infrastructure. Where is this content? Is it all up in Europe, and when does it start to come to Africa, et cetera? So we look at a couple of things. We look at IXPs, okay? So you guys are the guys, of course, that start connecting the networks, okay? Make it easier to drop a cache in somewhere, so you can start localizing it. And this is where we're seeing a change in traffic. At first, it was when caches went in, performance was better, higher demand, higher amounts of traffic. So people were consuming more. And then as people are consuming more, you have more bandwidth, international bandwidth coming in, and domestic bandwidth, and usually in places where you had subcables landing. And this is usually the places you'd have the concentration of IXs. So this is all pulled from the IXPDB. So go IXPDB. And we use that. We use it all the time. So as in TeleGeography. So it's like peering database and IXPDB we use a lot. And because we also follow this information, but we find it's a little bit more accurate in that database. So good job. Go team. Okay, and then we're looking at the CDNs. It's looking at the CDN geography. And looking at both cloud provider CDNs and other CDNs like Limelight, Cloudflare, et cetera. In Africa right now, 45 CDN nodes in sub-Saharan from about 13 providers. There may be more providers, but those are we carried. And these are only publicly available information. If this isn't public, it's not in here. So you may go, no, I know there's one here, but we couldn't put that one in here. This all tracks with IXPs. That's no surprise. It's a great place to put a cache. And primarily, you know, as you would have guessed, in primary and secondary hubs. So once you got the caches, that's working. Then you get a POP that arrives, build out a POP, and then the next thing that comes is a data center, cloud data center, et cetera. So At the moment, there are more than 90 current and planned data centers for sub-Saharan Africa, and of course in the major 3 markets. Now I know there's a lot of discussion about what is carrier neutral. So I just put everybody in here. Next year's discussion will be, we'll break it out by region and kind of look through the different types of data centers. So I know that's important, but at the moment, it's all together. So you just see big circles. All right. And now these are the data centers that are planned. There's 20 planned or recently launched data centers. So it's kind of gold rush time for data centers in Africa, as you all know, and as we can see with all the data centers here. And all those new IXs or IXs moving around. And okay. And once again, if you see something, a data center is missing, come and talk to me so we can work on it. Okay, now we've looked at the supply side. Now let's look at the demand side a little bit. You usually don't do this in this venue, but it was time. So potential surges in end user demand. Transition in mobile generations, of course, we see in capacity a jump or in demand. And we do see, like, when you see like there were 10 million subs added in Nigeria, like in a quarter or something crazy like that, you could actually see it in the bandwidth demand. So 3 to 4G, so you have more throughput, internet works better, more demand, et cetera, et cetera. And then, so the transition, but also fixed broadband subscribership uses a lot more capacity. There are a lot fewer, but so when we talk about slow growth for broadband, maybe a small growth, but it's a huge amount of data or capacity that's required. In this figure, it shows even though the mobile subscribers account for about 84% of all global broadband subscribers, it's the fixed broadband. It only makes up 16%, but accounts for 80% of all capacity demand throughput. So just a little bump, 1%, makes a big difference when you're talking about fixed broadband. As we see in Africa, there's a lot of activity on getting the fiber to the home, et cetera. Okay, going back to the mobile side. In this chart, we see going up, we see it's what the penetration rate is, and then the horizontal shows the population. And this is just a good way of looking at where we're going to see a lot of potential growth. Of course, anything that has any countries that have lower than 75% penetration and have huge populations. So guess what? Ethiopia and DRC are very interesting. Okay. And then if you break it down into looking at generations, 2G, 4G, we just go up to 4G here. There's a little bit of 5G here, but not much yet. We see there different countries broken into different patterns. DRC, Ethiopia, more than 50% 2G, just starting with 4G, probably a lot of potential there. And then if we look at Kenya, Nigeria, it's kind of an even split, 3G, 4G, but still a lot of 2G. And then if we talk about just looking at 4G rollouts, the dark blue line looks at a CAGR 2017, 2021, so 4 years. You see the growth, and then if you add just 2019, 2001, then DRC, Burkina Faso, and Mali pop in, and you see that there's huge growth in subscription. So same type of chart as we had before, but we're looking at the fixed broadband penetration. You break it out like this, but in reality, in Africa, it's very teeny tiny here. So there's, of course, a lot of room to grow, a lot of movement there. But once again, the countries that show up or added to it is Nigeria, but Ethiopia and DRC are also big. And this just shows the growth and then the net adds. But Ethiopia is that huge growth in a very large number of adds, and Kenya as well. And then it drops off. South Africa, I put in there, but it's just huge, a huge number already. In Nigeria, very small at the moment. Okay, so just some remarks on end user growth. Just as some of the countries that kind of stand out. You can compare Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire. Senegal has been rolling out 4G and fixed faster than Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire maybe a little bit slower, or have a little bit better penetration. Or I'm sorry, that was Senegal, but they had this huge population. So of course, or compared to Senegal, so it's something that's of interest. Kenya, Nigeria. Kenya's rolling out fixed broadband and 4G faster, but Nigeria is growing faster than Kenya right now. Okay. Yes. And then DRC, Ethiopia, just starting to roll out 4G like we saw, and fixed broadband has a lot of potential. And finally, Mali and Burkina Faso, just starting to roll out 4G and not as much growth in fixed broadband yet. Okay, and then I'll wrap it up just talking a little bit about what to expect with the new subcable systems. Good on time? Okay. I initially tried to go back because I wanted to talk more about what to expect when Equiano and To Africa land, to try to see what happened in Africa 2009 on the east side, 2009, 2010 on the east side, and looking about around 2012 on the west side when the major cables were landing. You do see in just looking at capacity, big spikes that in international capacity the year after it lands, but then it drops back down. But an interesting thing that we saw was if you think it goes to the coast first and then inland, but we're actually seeing growth inland as well. Not at the same amount, as in it's high growth, but only at a fraction of the actual capacity of the coastal countries. And on average, we did a talk about this on landlocked countries. Coastal countries have about 5 times more international capacity than inland in Africa. So we'll see boosts in capacity right away, and that's one thing. And then what we also see is an increase in the size of intra-African routes. And we see a lot of more intra-African routes like through subcable. So we'll see something about that. Decline in prices. When I look back, it's very hard to pick out, because if you go back 10 years, you're still selling STM1s, and now we can't compare that to the 10 gig or now 100 gig that are selling. But there is always a steady decline. But I don't think it's the decline is more, I think, based on, especially in Africa, competition as well. When you have more providers with more capacity, you see the prices drop. Not necessarily just adding capacity, but you have to have many providers, and not like a SAT3 that only have one provider and prices didn't drop. But also what we'll see is localized content growth. The increasing number of CDN caches and POPs, and then the DC builds, like we were saying. Once you get, once you get a couple of cloud data centers in there, then you'll see a lot more, I think, more intra-African capacity building as well to connect the data centers within Africa. So we'll see a huge jump there. And then, of course, when the content providers come in, then it kind of builds out an ecosystem. Internet works well, a lot of end users, and you'll see an ecosystem grow in those areas. And finally, the edge is moving closer to African users. So 5-10 years ago, everything was being pulled out of Europe. You had some caches, but not a ton yet. And that's really only been in the last 3 to 5 years where we're seeing changes in capacity and traffic within Africa, that it's not all going back up into Africa. Now it's staying within Africa. Just like in South America, it all used to go to Sao Paulo and then back up to Miami. Now they're building out within, or everybody, I'm sorry, would individually, like Argentina, Chile, et cetera, would all go back up to Miami. Now we're seeing Sao Paulo being a hub, and like Buenos Aires and Santiago starting to grow as well. Same thing we're seeing is in Africa with Joburg, and then with Lagos and Nairobi, and then the secondary ones. So things are looking good, I think, but I'm an optimist. So that's all for me. So questions?
Thank you very much, Patrick. Patrick is definitely a good return speaker. We always like to hear what he has to say. Do we have any questions from the floor?
Not about the,
Are you coming to, yes, Michelle? Why is it take? Yes.
you're on.
Thank you. My name is Nishal. Where's he? I've got questions for you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Always interesting data. I'm glad we brought you all those years ago, and you still continue to provide interesting information. Some questions. Why, in your first few slides, you showed very poor growth in LATAM, and that's concerning.
Yeah, it is and isn't.
Right? It's like 20% worse off than Africa right now. And if
Yeah.
what you were saying was we are following, well, I mean, LATAM tends to lead, and our route for following this is usually 2 to 3 years behind it. Well, that spells, you could read that as spelling bad for Africa. I don't really believe that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious as to what that growth was. My understanding of it is that there's been some really regressive policies in the region. Would you amount the lack of growth to that, or are there other reasons?
It is a very regional, specific regional thing, and I'm not the LATAM expert, but it was regional, and it was traffic patterns were changing, rearranging, and I think at the time we're guessing that there was a lot more peering going on, and that we saw maybe a bump of localization of content. So we saw a slowdown, but then it's increased again now. So we're not 100% sure why. And they didn't really have good explanations for us either of why it wasn't growing as fast. But I do think as a region in general, it's nice to track that versus Africa, but there are many more countries in Africa, huge population, et cetera. So you can't do a direct comparison.
No, absolutely not.
Hi, I'm Ben Roberts, Liquid Intelligent Technologies. I was having a conversation over breakfast, and one of your slides talks exactly to it, which was showing that in some countries, the price of IP transit in that country has now dropped below the price of an international 10 gig wave. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the reasons for that, and I was perhaps wondering if maybe it means that our finance departments and product managers starting to understand what we do, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on why it's dropping.
Yes, maybe. No, but we see just in general pricing dropping, and we're seeing, I think it's also about building out of content locally as well. And for IPT, we're seeing the quality of local IPT, not only in pricing, but the quality getting better. So you're buying more local IPT.
Can I ask that questioners keep their questions short and quick answers, because we are running late. But Michuki.
Thanks, Michuki Mwangi, Internet Society. First, a comment on the intra-African routes. Is it possible for you to use the different color, or for you to actually map that differently from the submarine in truck?
Like landlocked or terrestrial routes versus?
Yes,
yes.
So that we can track the growth over time.
Yes, and that's something I can add for next year. But at the moment, it's such a small amount, and it depends, because a lot of this information comes directly from the ISPs, and think about if it's difficult for them to say, oh, this much, it's a little bit extra work. So I can try.
Okay.
But at the moment, it's very small.
So the second part is, I noticed that the growth of the reduction of the erosion of price between Mombasa, or rather Mombasa and Kampala are comparable, while Nairobi is cheaper than Mombasa when the cables are landing in Mombasa.
Right.
What's driving that? Do you have an idea?
The erosion?
Yes.
It
looks like it's cheaper in Nairobi compared to Mombasa.
But the cost or the erosion?
Yeah, what's driving the fact that it's cheaper in Nairobi compared to Mombasa and Kampala? And Kampala is the same as Mombasa.
Right. If I understand for the pricing, what it is if it's Nairobi, and I have to look again, but Nairobi, Kampala should be cheaper than Mombasa, unless there's some type of special deal or something. But and it did show in the slide that
Yeah, Mombasa
okay.
was
I
much
have to
higher
double
than-
check that one. The pricing team.
I'm
I
going
blame
to,
it on somebody else.
I'm going to close the question queue. So the three people we have standing are the last three questions.
But I can get back to you
sorry.
on that one. I can give somebody a call.
So gentleman in the middle.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cedric Adrian-Beye from Afrinic. Thank you very much for the presentation and for all those valuable information. Just a comment. It's very interesting, the data that you have actually showed us. We are more focused on people that are doing good, which is good for the commercial companies. But now you also have companies, institutions in the continent or everywhere that are now working with those that are least connected. So I would like to know, do you have data on those that are least connected, which will be a gain for people like us that are working with them to make them grow? Thank you.
The least connected, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. The difficult part there is the least connected are usually the hardest to get information from and have the least data. So I kind of do an analogy with pricing. People ask us, why don't we have pricing for like Central African Republic, something like that? You know, it's like, well, there's like no competition, not many providers. So it's hard to get information. And we have to have for pricing at least 4 quotes before we can print anything, so it doesn't out anybody's pricing. So we have some of the data, and we can do a focus on this. But for this, for AfPIF, already I go way over my time. So I'm just kind of doing the big picture of the big things that are happening. But maybe we can do a focus on that for next time.
Yes, please. If there is a way even for us to reach out and get those
Oh yeah,
data.
yeah, that would be great.
very
Always, anybody needs to reach out to me or has any questions about this or wants to give me data, please contact me.
Okay, thank you.
Ben.
Hey, Ben Ryle, Meta and PeerInDB. Thanks for a great presentation, Patrick. Excellent as always. You mentioned for IXPs you used IXPDB to help aid CDN locations. Have you considered using PeerInDB, or did you? And did I?
Oh yeah. We use both actually.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, it's just it was an easier export to get that for the data for IXPDB. But definitely, we always use the two together.
We should talk more about the CDN map then.
Yeah.
Michelle.
It's just the public stuff, man.
Michelle.
I have one question and 2 comments. My
Yes.
first comment was going to be your data source for exchange points is incorrect. I noticed very quickly because my eyes are poor, Madagascar and Namibia, for example, are missing.
Yeah.
You should
Yeah.
speak to Ben and you should speak to Sarah. She can help you get data from PCH.
Okay.
My question is really, now that you've been talking about the growth prices in Africa dropping, what do you think is your opinion on, well, what's your opinion on more intra-Africa cables? I recognize, Fearghas, sorry, this is a long question, a long answer rather, but is this the time for us to see more intra-Africa cables instead of cables that continue to import bandwidth from the developed north?
Yeah, claro que sí. I mean, it's very, of course.
Because we don't have those. We don't have too
Right.
many of those right
You
now, right?
do, but this is the positive part. Those are the lines that are showing up connecting the landlocked countries. We're seeing that growing. And it's, I mean, honestly, it's just in the last 1.5, 2 years that we're seeing growth in the intra. And there's a lot of projects going on right now to cross Africa by many of the providers here. And so I think it's in full growth right now. A lot of building going on. So we are seeing that now. And yeah, we see 2 big subcables coming. That's great for, I mean, also for redundancy. It'd be great to have a 3rd on each side, big one. But so I think it is necessary, it's going to happen. But I think once we start seeing cloud data centers like appearing in like Kenya and Nigeria, there'll be even more intra-African terrestrial routes growing.
Okay, I have a lot more to ask you, but I'll ask that later. Just one more comment for next year's, because you'll invariably be back next year. Could you add more data on other African to African regions? So for example, you showed Johannesburg to London, which is great because I live in Johannesburg, so it's interesting to me. But you don't have data on, for example, Johannesburg to Nairobi or Joburg to Lagos, Cote d'Ivoire to Lagos, et cetera, et cetera.
For what,
more
for pricing
African to
or
African.
for
Pricing,
capacity?
Pricing, for example. If you could start providing trends on that, that would be really helpful.
We do
It's a
have it.
request.
We do have it. It's just, these are the most, this is the best data that we have, as in the most big picture data we have. But yes,
Just seeing
I
as how
always
it's
try to throw in.
AfPIF and we want to promote intra-African connectivity, it would be handy to see that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, Dan.
That's all right, Patrick. It's good content. So, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Patrick. Round of applause, please, for everyone. Next up is Andrew Owens from Teraco, who's going to talk about developing things in South Africa.
I always forget how short Patrick is. Okay, welcome back. It's great to meet people in person again. I guess one of the benefits of meeting people in person is I don't have to ask if you can see my screen when I share it. So I'm Andrew. I've been coming to AfPIF for a couple of years. I remember my first AfPIF in Johannesburg in 2012. I do still have the T-shirt. It just seems to have shrunk in certain parts, which is why I'm not wearing it. So I'm glad we got a new one. And that event in 2012, you know, for us as South Africans was a bit of an eye opener. You know, we were, I guess you could say we were newbies, and it was great to be part of this community where people are talking about the same things that we were, I want to say, struggle with. And so in the interest of time, because I think we're running a bit behind, just a brief history of South Africa. And, you know, there's a lot of the stuff that Patrick has spoken about is in here as well, but I'll try and put it into a sort of a South African context. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead to what I see as a South African as the sort of the turning points, or the events that happened that put us on the path to achieve what we were talking about at that first AfPIF event that I attended. And I think the first part in South Africa from internet connectivity point of view was in '96 when ISPA was formed. You know, at the time, South Africa still had an incumbent, or, you know, we don't like to use the word monopoly, but that was the reality. So ISPA was formed as a body to combat that monopolization. Interestingly, also, that was the year that the first internet exchange was established in South Africa. In '97, SATRA actually defined the internet as an area of competition. Again, that was one of the biggest milestones. Then it meant that the incumbent couldn't monopolize that market. 2000 onwards, we started getting broadband, so DSL. There was still a heavy reliance on wireless at the same time. And then from 2008, well, 2005 actually is when the court case against the ministry and ICASA started. So it was basically private industry who started a court case against the ministry, and the desired outcome was the ability for anyone other than the state-owned telecoms company to be able to build their own infrastructure. So in other words, put my own fiber in the ground and sell services across that. The court case was won in 2008, and incidentally, that is the same year that Teraco started. And I always tell everybody at these events that Teraco wouldn't really have been a success without that court case being won. So overnight, we suddenly saw an explosion of of new ISPs, new operators in the market, and that obviously lent itself well to the business that we were starting at that time. 2012, we started NAP Africa, which is an internet exchange point in South Africa.
operating out of Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban. Then after that, cable started landing. CCOM was the first, big one after we started to land. And from there, you can see, if you follow this, I'm sure the slides will be shared afterwards, exactly when all of the wireless LTE, 4G, and recently 5G has gone live in the country. And so just going back to that first AfPIF meeting that we had, as I said, it was an eye opener for us. We had built a couple of facilities by that stage, and we were focusing on the South African market. And once we got part of this community, we started to realize that the ecosystem is not necessarily just a South African one. And so, as has been mentioned previously about how localization works and what is required for it, it's an ecosystem, right? We were building data centers, and we had just started an internet exchange, but we didn't really at that point consider the rest of the ecosystem. And so we spent a lot of time traveling, speaking to people, across the world. And back then we always went to people and said, look, we're from Africa, we're trying to learn. I remember getting to the US once, and somebody asked me, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Cape Town. And they said, Australia. And just a few months later, I was in Europe doing a talk there, and I said to the audience, I said, hands up, who knows where Africa is? And everybody put their hand up, and I said, oh, okay, so there's no Americans in the crowd. We have American investors now, so that joke's not going to work going forward. But yeah, I remember, one of the first meetings we went to in Dublin, at that stage, they asked us to do a quick talk about what was happening in South Africa. And, this was early days. And the conversations that they were having then was about hundreds of gigabits of traffic across internet exchanges and, reaching terabits and that sort of thing. And they asked me on stage and said, so how much traffic are you doing? And I said 3. And they all clapped and said, wow, 300 gigabits, that's amazing for Africa. And I'm like, no, it's 3 gigabits. Okay, so that's obviously changed over time. And so, as I said, I'm going to try and make this as South African as possible. But I definitely don't want anybody to think that this is a sort of a template or, a blueprint for achieving what the purpose is of AfPIF. Okay, so again, I'm not going to, my numbers are probably slightly different than Patrick's, but 35% increase in global internet bandwidth. I think this is from 2020. A large part of that was obviously due to, I don't want to call it COVID, but a large part of it was definitely due to lockdowns imposed because of COVID. But in Africa, as you saw in the previous one, we're looking at about a compound annual growth rate of about 47% in Africa from 2016 to 2020. And, it's easy to say that, from a South African context, it was just because of COVID. But what we saw, and what was, I guess, every cloud has a silver lining, was that government in South Africa and the regulators started understanding the importance of internet. If you're going to force people to work from home for an extended period of time, it means that you're going to have to make an effort to make it easier for people to give access to the internet. And so we, during South Africa's lockdown period, got special permission to continue building data centers. The fiber operators got special permission to continue rolling out fiber. And it was not necessarily the way that we wanted it to happen, but it did. It was a sort of a collaboration between government and private industry, because that understanding was suddenly there. If you have people that are forced to work from a different location, if they can't access the internet, that has a direct impact on the economy. And so that was positive from a South African point of view. Again, just that understanding of the necessity of what we do. Okay, and as much as that is happening, as much as we are seeing physical infrastructure going in, Africa as a whole is still a mobile economy. And as innovative as we have been with mobile, it is just the reality in the continent, and especially in more open markets open markets. And just to give you a stat on that is in 2022, 47 million users in South Africa accessed the internet from a mobile device. So that's almost 80% mobile penetration rate. And as much as we have seen fiber to the home boom, it's certainly nowhere near that mobile rate. So last mile investment is definitely growing. As I said, it's not being impacted, well, it wasn't impacted by the lockdowns. There is a boom in fiber to the home, fiber in the ground. And again, that's because the work from home strategies are becoming more prevalent. And that, again, as I said, is due to the fact that people are starting to understand that the internet has a direct impact on economies. And then from a subsea and terrestrial fiber point of view, again, that is still continuing. We're seeing what is referred to as regionalization. It was mentioned earlier that these are the hubs, and that's important from a South African perspective. You know, we've always seen the hubs as South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria. But from our perspective, it's important to look at that regionalization, and I'll give you a slide going forward. What we've also seen in terms of terrestrial fiber is there is some terrestrial fiber that is in the ground, but there is a sort of a growing frustration with the underutilization of that infrastructure. So in other words, it's there, but there's still a focus on maximizing return on investment instead of looking at the long-term economic benefit of opening that up, or bringing those prices down. Subsea, I'm not going to go into that. I think Patrick's done a great job on that. And then access infrastructure, again, in South Africa, rapidly growing, as it is in other countries across the continent. Okay, and then from our perspective, as data center builders and operators, there's a definite increase in the size of the data centers that are being put down. So the average facility size, or the average multi-tenant facility across the continent, is now or exceeds 2.5 megawatts per facility. Now, if you compare that to South Africa, just from our point, we've just finished a Cape Town data center, which is a 60 megawatt facility. We've done an additional one in Johannesburg at 80, I think. And we are now busy with a new facility as well. So just as comparison to South Africa. Okay, and then obviously cloud is linked, as has been mentioned, to data center growth. And as you can see there from that map, those are the cloud on-ramps that we're seeing currently across the continent. Okay, that is an actual cable station from 1879 in Durban, which was linked through to Europe. And yes, those are ox, or an ox wagon in the front there. What's changed obviously over time is that the technology focus and investment has moved from the cable landing stations into more hyperscale and edge data centers. Okay, and then we've all seen this map, not as extensive as the ones we've seen earlier, but I think the important part of this slide is basically, if you looked at it from South Africa, you effectively at this stage have direct access to 15 neighboring countries. And again, that goes back to the conversation about the hubs and the regionalization of content and cloud. Okay, just some pictures there of cables being pulled into Cape Town, obviously a long time ago. And then recently, as you know, Equiano landed in Melkbos in Cape Town. And just to give you an idea there, if you look at that SAT2 cable, that had a build capacity of 560 megabits per second. And you compare that to the Equiano on the right, which has a current capacity of 144 terabits per second. Okay, and then again, what was mentioned is cloud is part of that ecosystem. You know, once again, as I said, when we started all of this, we didn't necessarily think of cloud as an ecosystem or a part of the ecosystem because it wasn't really a thing in Africa back then. I still remember going to a couple of these conferences, and at one of them there was somebody handing out a sticker that said the cloud is just somebody else's computer, and that's obviously not the case anymore. And so what's driving this is at this stage, you know, from a South African perspective, for cloud infrastructure development and investment, we tick all of those boxes. And again, that hub makes it available for all of the neighboring countries as well. Okay, and why South Africa for the clouds? South Africa, if you looked at 19 out of the top 25 countries on the continent are headquartered in South Africa. And again, because of everything that's happened in the last couple of years, there is an acceleration now, especially of enterprises moving into cloud, into the cloud, basically. This is more of a sales slide, but yeah, you know, that pretty much speaks for itself. This is cloud going to Europe versus cloud locally. Of course, then the cloud has led to cloud exchanges. Africa at the moment, I think only has, well, South Africa at least only has 4 cloud on-ramps at the moment. Amazon, Microsoft are the first to invest in cloud in Africa, and have obviously seen a very positive uptake in that. You know, and a lot of people say it's because of what's happened over the last couple of years, but it's, you know, there's a lot of other sort of metrics that play into this. And what we've seen is in South Africa, very important is the capex versus the opex. It starts making more sense to get into the cloud, and also generally a skills shortage, you know, on physical infrastructure. So it makes more sense in a lot of cases for enterprises to move into cloud. Okay, cool. And then across our own Africa Cloud Exchange, in 2020 saw 48% growth in networks connected to the Cloud Exchange. And obviously this is enterprises, and not just from South Africa, but from neighboring countries connecting to cloud. And I think the latest number is we're up to about 160 networks connected to this. Okay, IXPs, the number is disputed at this stage, but 50 odd IXPs across the continent. 6 of those are in South Africa and are all doing very well. Obviously, I'll give an example of our own internet exchange. At the start of 2020, we were at about a terabit of traffic. That's now increased to 2.6 terabits of traffic. So that, you know, represents a 160% increase, and certainly not slowing down as everybody anticipated. It continues to grow. And then there was mention of the ISOC 80/20 initiative. This was something that came up in the early days. The idea was basically that 80% of your traffic should remain or on continent by the year 2020. And I think thus far, or at the time that the report came out, Kenya, Nigeria were up to 70%, and South Africa was considered as the most. We were the ones that had managed to reach the 80/20 target. And then just on the internet exchanges, you know, we've been through quite a bit, you know, from many points of view in telecoms in South Africa. And I just wanted to highlight that this is not just a problem that a regulator or a policymaker or a government needs to solve. It needs to be a collaboration between all of that, and it needs to include private industry as well. And I remember back in the day, this organization, MWeb, couldn't get local peering with the incumbent. They had to buy transit from them. So what they did is effectively de-peered them in South Africa and forced them to get all of their content via Europe. So in other words, the incumbent had to fetch them from Europe, which obviously resulted in poor quality for their users. And it was the way that they did it was quite clever. They basically got as much content onto their network as possible and made sure that they were using it across transit, and then forced them overseas, and eventually got free peering across the exchanges. Okay, cool. All right, and then where are we? As you see, Africa is the next frontier. Connectivity has improved significantly. We definitely know that from our perspective in South Africa, it has. We've seen it improve basically across the continent. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And the conversations that we were having back in the beginning, if you go through all of the slides that have been done in AfPIF over the years, you'll see the word challenges used a lot. And I've heard it a couple of times today as well. And we had this conversation a couple of years ago where we said, should we be still calling these challenges? Shouldn't we be looking at them as opportunities? And I hope that does happen. From our perspective, as much as we are doing well in our own country, mobile is still expensive, and fixed broadband is still something that is out of reach for most of the population. And then I just wanted to add again on the whole challenges and opportunities. A lot of conversations I've had this week have been the same thing: challenges, complaints, things that don't work, fears. And I just wanted to remind everybody that in the last decade we have seen a lot of change, and it's not just internally. We've seen a lot of change across the continent, and I think we should all be proud of that. And don't put yourselves down. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Governmental group has to leave, so if we could give them a moment to leave. Thank you for coming. And then we'll go do Q&A afterwards. Thank you. So do we have any questions for Andrew? There's a lot of data in that talk, so do we have, yes, we have a question.
I don't want to be responsible for everyone missing at lunch.
That's okay, we have other things to stop them getting to lunch before you.
My name is Issa from MTN.
Sorry, can we have the microphone up a bit, please? No, the volume. Sorry.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, my name is Issa from MTN Rwanda. Thanks for the presentation. The two last presentation really has a lot of insights. There's a lot of development in terms of keeping the traffic local, but there's a little being said in terms of facilitating, movement. We know there's a lot of mobile subscribers, but when it comes to mobile data, quality of service and price, there's very little being said, and little in terms of investment to facilitate users. As we see, for example, in East Africa, we have over 400 million population. I see there's a potential by investing on infrastructure and price as when it comes to roaming for mobile subscribers. So any thoughts would be really, really appreciated.
Yeah, look, and I think, as I was saying earlier, we found ourselves in the same position. And as I said, I highlighted those few points at the beginning, was the opening up of the markets. And I think again, it's not just about liberalization. We can't do this as private organizations on our own. It was more about the collaboration with regulators and with government in the country. But as I said, we certainly were in the same position. And it's only when we started understanding that entire ecosystem, because it's fine to say, well, mobile data is very expensive now, but you need to look at all of the things that are connecting those together. So in other words, the towers, you're looking at the backhaul, you're looking at where that lands in a facility, you're looking at how that gets across a border and how that gets to the destination. So it's not just about that one thing. It's that engagement of that ecosystem and everything and how it fits together.
Okay. Looks like we have no more questions. Thank you again, Andrew. Sorry we had to cut a bit short at the end. So lunchtime. But before we go there, we're going to do the group conference photograph. So rather than going downstairs the normal way through the steps, when you go out of the room here, go straight ahead onto the terrace, and you'll be guided downstairs by ushers who will take you to the area we're going to do the photograph. And then we will hand out lunch tickets after that. And then you go back into the restaurant with your lunch ticket to get your lunch. There's Women Tech Connect lunch happening at the same time. Use the same ticket for that. And there's tables set aside indoors for that. As ever, if you've got peering personal requests, please send them in and enjoy your lunch and try and be back for 2 o'clock, please, for the next panel. Thank you.